Our next guest speaker is, I can't say enough about him. He's an amazing educator. He knows a ton about everything in this business. And I don't want to cut his time short, so David Tillman, you are up, my friend.
Thanks, Daryl. Does it work? This. Great. Well, good evening. Is it too loud? Okay, a little less feedback. I'm the landlord. How many in the room are landlords? Good, most of you are landlords. I handed out a little flyer, and I want you to know that we don't have to follow it at all, but it's a place to start. And you can get me off track anywhere you want, because you've got an hour of my time. I'm the guy that really enjoys being a landlord. I don't know what else I could do. I kind of failed into this business, as maybe some of you did. But being a landlord, the income comes in whether you're sleeping or working. And a lot of the folks down here, you guys work much harder than I work. I mean, the people who do the flipping, I'm staying with Reggie, and he's going a mile a minute all the time. I don't do that, and I haven't done that for quite some time. So let me walk you through a couple of things. How many people know the series Rich Dad, Poor Dad? You know the difference between assets and liabilities? Okay, so I'm in the house business. So houses are my assets, right? Assets feed you, liabilities eat you. Houses feed you, right? How many people think vacant houses feed you? They don't. They're a liability. What feeds you in this business? Tenants. Tenants feed you. So you ought to realize that really, in my opinion, tenants are your biggest assets if you're going to be in this long term. And I really do believe that if you're going to be in the business long term, you need to learn property management. If you don't, you really end up inventorying properties for those like myself that end up owning it down the road. Now, the biggest problem with most landlords is after about 20 years, they're burned out. They make comments like tenants are liars, tenants never look as good as the day they moved in. That's not my perception. I think the problem is with the landlord. We've had a lot of discussion tonight about systems. I'm here to tell you, you need systems in this business. Systems is the key. I was a psych major in college. I thought all I needed was people skills. People skills won't make it. You will burn out if you just have people skills. If you have no people skills at all, and you have good systems, the systems buy you the time to develop the people skills. If you have the people skills without the systems, it just won't work. So let me start through a couple of the comments, the points I've got here, and let me tell you why I started it kind of from the approach of most of them all start out why. How many people in the room have heard of Simon Sinek? A couple have. Simon wrote a book called Why, and you can find Simon on TED.com, and I recommend you do listen to him. He did some studies, and he said, you know, many people can tell you what they do. Some people can tell you how they do what they do, but very few people can tell you why they do what they do. And I think the why you do what you do is really, really important in this business. When I graduated from college, my parents gave me all my report cards over all the years that I was in school, and I went all the way back to kindergarten. And my report card in kindergarten said, David asked more questions than anyone else in the class. And I think asking questions are really good. And if you ask why questions and you analyze, you'll find you won't do what everyone else does. And if you do what everyone else does, you'll get about the same results that most other people do, which generally is not that great. Have any of you in the room read the book Good to Great by Jim Collins? Excellent book, don't you think? Excellent. Jim Collins is a PhD professor at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and he had his graduate students analyze the difference between all public companies from, I believe, the 20s, maybe the 30s on. And what he wanted to determine was, what was the difference between a good company and a great company? And the way he defined that was companies that had a significant change in their earnings and were able to sustain that change for a period of greater than 5 years. And one of the things he came up with was that good companies hire people to do a job. Great companies find the best people they can find and put them on the company bus, knowing that those people will know where they need to drive the company. That's my whole approach in management. I hire the best tenants to run my properties for me. I really do. And I think that as landlords, that's what you need to be looking at doing. If you view your tenants as an employee that you're hiring to do a job, you will view everything differently. Now, what's the job description? Well, you each have to come up with your own job description, but I can tell you what mine is. Mine is number one, most important job for me is I want you to maintain and improve my house and grounds. That's what I want, more than anything else. Number two, I want you to pay the rent on time, but that's a given. If you don't want to do that, don't rent from me. I'm too tough. We do serve a 3-day notice if we ever have to, which is extremely rare, before noon on the 1st. Why before noon on the 1st? Because my rents are due before the 1st in my bank account. Every one of my September rents were in my bank account last Friday, which is the 30th of August. Number three, we want you to get along with the neighbors. And number four, we want you to stay, and I look them in the eye and I tell them, I want you to stay at least for your lifetime, and hopefully for your kids' lifetime. And we smile about it. But I really am in the long-term business. If you're not in the long-term business, turnover will eat you alive. You really want people to stay in your properties long-term. And lastly, I say, I want you to leave me alone. And what we pledge to do is leave you alone, treat you with respect. The key is getting the right person in there. And so tonight, I thought, if you wanted me to, I'd talk to you a little bit about how we screen folks and go through a few of these things. Is this all right? Make sense? I will tell you that I really like interaction. I really like people to take me on. I like you to hold my feet to the fire. It doesn't bother me at all if you interrupt me and take me in a different direction, because this is your time, and I want to cover anything you want me to cover regarding houses. Okay? I do recommend you take a look at Good to Great. Excellent book in terms of business and how to analyze your business. So just looking at going down some of these, and we'll get off them eventually, but why do landlords pre-qualify applicants before allowing them to view their properties? Question, someone answer, why do you? Don't want to waste your time. Obvious answer, you don't want to waste any time at all. Absolutely right. I'm going to suggest that maybe you should be involved with them until after they viewed the property and turned in an application. Now, you have a handout. Does everyone have a handout? Yeah. Did everyone get one? On the back side of that handout is a new rule that was posted in the Federal Register on February 15th that I doubt most of you have seen. And it has to do with fair housing. And let's just cover a couple of basics of fair housing. The first issue on fair housing is the whole idea of protected classes. And we have federal, state, and local protected classes. And we can't discriminate against any of those classes, and you need to know what those classes are. Basic. That's been there for a long time. The next thing that has come up with fair housing is reasonable accommodation. And reasonable accommodation had to do with, you know, if someone needs a wheelchair ramp and you can reasonably put it in the property, you can put grab bars on the shower, those kinds of things. They have a support animal that is not treated like a pet. That's reasonable accommodation. Well, the latest thing, which I think is the scariest thing I've seen from fair housing since I got the business, and I got the business in 1978, is something called disparate impact. And I've given you the information from disparate impact right here, condensed, but you can kind of see it. And let me just point out a few things, because it really is something that you need to be aware of. And it's one of the reasons I'm going to suggest that you might want to look at why you do what you do. And for example, in our business, we do not pre-qualify anyone before they see the property. Okay? Disparate impact says that if you're doing everything right in terms of fair housing, you're not discriminating illegally based on any protected class. However, whatever your procedure is, does have a disparate impact on one group of protected individuals over another, then you can be deemed guilty as charged, and you can be subject to actual punitive damages and penalties. And the example that comes up, and I've got the quote right from the Federal Register, and you can read it. There were some questions asked. The question was pointed out that if you do criminal reports on applicants, you know, you check out folks to make sure they're not sex offenders, or they haven't had a prison record for something that could really be a problem. That might, the point was made that that might impact one specific group more than another because that group has a greater incidence of incarceration. The question is, are you going to not be allowed to do criminal reports down the road? And if you read HUD's response to that, you see that they say, we're not going to tell you. We're going to look at it on an individual basis and deem down the road where you stand. That's pretty scary. Because one of the few places that I know of that in this country that you're deemed guilty until proven innocent is fair housing. You have to defend yourself. So if you reanalyze, going back to that question, why do you pre-qualify? If you can set up a system where folks can find out about your properties, see your properties, and give you an application, and you can say, we haven't talked to them, we haven't seen them, we don't know anything about them, that might be in your best interest to at least consider if you can figure out a system to do that. Understand where I'm coming from? Just moving things around. And I'll show you what we do and why we do what we do. Of course, timing is tremendous. The amount of effort, if I'm looking to hire someone to do a job and be a good steward of my asset, I got to have multiple people apply. And most landlords can't allow the time involvement to wait for that right person. They may have to show up to 50 people before that person surfaces. So you've got to have a system to have that happen without you putting the time involved. Fair enough? Why do landlords wait until vacancies before they show the properties? Why do they? How about make-readies? I mean, you got to clean the carpet, you got to do some paint, right? How about capital improvements? Is that normal? Do most of you wait to show a property until it's vacant, or not?
Yes.
This is going to be a long night still in response.
I would say most yes.
Yes.
Well, think about this for a second. If that's true, what day of the month do most of your tenants move out of your properties?
30th, end of the month.
Last day, right? What day of the month do most people move into your properties?
First day of the month.
So if you're really good at make-readies and you can turn a property in 3 days, how much time have you lost?
A month.
30 days. Now the next question is, what's your average turnover on your properties? I mean, that's a question for the group. I don't know this area, and you're all different. There's no right answer. Do they turn over once a year? If they do, you've lost 8.33% vacancy. 8.33%. Do they turn over every other year? That's 4.2%. How often do they turn over? Really important, and important for other reasons too. Have you ever heard of anyone losing an air conditioning system on a vacant house? It happens in some parts of the country. Have you heard of copper wire being stripped out of the walls? I mean, maybe none of these things happen here, and maybe it's a non-issue, and maybe your lawns take care of themselves and everything works great. But I want to go from a tenant to a tenant with no downtime. If they don't stay for their life and their kids' life and stay until I'm gone myself. You know, I mean, that's the objective. You really want that continuity. And when you talk about longevity, my longest tenant was with me for 24 years and 10 months. So when I say I'm in the long-term business, I am in the long-term business. My next longest tenant was with us for 18 years. Our average tenant the last time we checked was 5.7 years. I have to be honest with you and tell you it's less than that today. Things have changed. You know, we have had more turnover. But we really have systems to at least to turn that yearling tenant into a second-year tenant. Because if they stay past the first year, you got a real good shot at keeping them long-term. It's harder for them to move. You know, if I had to give you a visual of how to trap tenants in a house, you really want a house, let's say, with a 2-car garage and a garage door opener. And the very first thing you want to do is hang a great big sign on the garage door opener saying, danger, high voltage, do not use. Why? So they store their stuff in there. You don't want to put their cars in there. The more stuff they accumulate, the tougher it is for them to move. Your objective is to get your tenants to stay. I mean, you really got to think this through. This is a business. This is not a hobby. You are trying to generate income from your rental property. Fair enough? Yeah. Putting a storage shed in the back for them? I'd rather have them put their storage shed in the back and take it with them when they leave. But you could put a storage shed in the back to accumulate stuff. I don't want hoarders. I mean, I don't want to go overboard, but I'd love for them to use their garage to a degree, and I'm just giving you the picture of you really want them to put down roots and stay a while, whatever that means. A bunch of you are flippers. Do any of you flippers stage your properties? How do you do that? Do you hire someone to do it? What does that mean exactly? What do you do when you stage a property?
Every room has something.
You put something in it, right? And then you take pictures of it and mark it that way and maybe do videos of it. Is that right? How many of you landlords stage your properties? We got one. Not many. Now let me give you an idea for those of you who don't. A way to do it. Can you imagine a way to do it that doesn't cost you a dime? That you don't have to do no labor, no heavy lifting? Do you have people with furniture in your houses now?
Yeah.
You should be collecting pictures of all of your tenants' furniture in their houses if they're any good. And that doesn't mean just the current tenant. It means over a 10-year period. A lot of tenants collect pictures and advertise the best pictures when it comes up for you to turn over the house. Now, how do you do that? Well, if you have an opportunity to go to your house and see the tenants, and you look at it, it looks great, you say, oh my gosh, the place looks like $1 million. Do you mind if I take a few pictures? Because you might not stay until you die. Or you may die before I want you to die, and I may need some pictures to market the place. They're thrilled that you think their place looks well, and they let you do it. And it's not a difficult sell at all. It's very, very easy. I really recommend you take pictures of your properties. I also recommend that you use a wide-angle lens. If you look on the internet at some of these pictures and people take a picture of a bathroom and all you see is the toilet, I mean, it doesn't do anything. You can get a wide-angle lens, really an inexpensive camera. We actually have a wide-angle lens now that goes on my iPhone. And I can walk around with my iPhone and video and upload it directly from my iPhone without ever putting it on my computer and having a video walkthrough of the property. So there are many ways you can accomplish that, but you can get an inexpensive digital camera with a wide angle. I recommend you start taking pictures of your properties. Now, one of the things that we do is we advertise our properties on the internet. You know, I'm old enough and been in this long enough that we used to start with newspapers. And we try and rent a 2-line ad, and it cost an arm and a leg, and there was no pictures, but that's all we had. Now what we really do is we go online, We go to Google and we go houses for rent in our town, and we see what comes up in the non-paid ads on Google. And in your town's going to be different than mine. So you got to look and see what comes up. Everyone says Craigslist. Well, Craigslist may be one. It's not at the top of the list in my town. In my town, rentals.com is probably number one. It's a paid site, and it will push out to other sites. I use a number of sites. I use postlets.com. Does anyone use postlets? Postlets will send out to a whole series of sites. It's free. You can get on Trulia. You can get a whole bunch of sources. I'm in a military town, so I use AHRN, which is a military website. Doesn't cost any money. Put your properties on a whole bunch of websites. Get the ads out there. Our system, again, once they see the ad, it tells them where to call. And they see 17 pictures of the property. More is better than less. They've got the benefits of that property rather than just the bare features. You want to give them a feel of how that house can be their home to the best of your ability. Then it gives them a number to call. They call that number. It's our 24-hour rental information hotline. It tells them what we have, where it is, how to see it, and how much. And they hear about the other properties we've got also. But it tells them to call the existing occupants. And we've motivated the existing occupants to show all of our properties. And our occupants are on the same team with us. We're trying to accomplish the same task. And I'm here to tell you that if you hire your tenants as if they were an employee and you share expectations with them, and they know the job description, you'll get much more out of your properties. Our properties generally improve over time. Comment, question?
How do you motivate the existing tenant to show the property?
Well, how do I motivate the existing tenant to show the property? First thing is, that's how they saw the property. Second thing is that we pay a performance bonus when they move out, after they move out, based on how they performed while they're in our property. The performance bonus can be an amount greater than, equal to, lesser than, or none of the amount of the first month's rent when they move in. I find the carrot works infinitely better in this business than the stick. Most landlords, when they're dealing with a tenant, say, here's the contract, sign here, press our last copy's yours, read it later if you want, move into the house, sit in a chair, face the wall, and don't touch it. And if you do anything wrong, here's how we're going to beat you up. And it involves a security deposit. And too often it ends up with some disagreement that you might end up standing in front of a judge. If instead of doing that, you reward with positive responses, we say, now here's the house, now go make it a home. We don't want you to do anything that's going to hurt yourself, hurt someone else, or hurt the property. So if you have any big ideas, clear it with us up front in advance so it doesn't come back to haunt us or haunt you. And we want to do it right with all the building permits or anything else that's involved. Comment.
They actually had some property issues concerned about living there because they built my tenant proceeded to explain to this person that no, that's the other zip code, that zip code, and had to stand out in the front yard and talk to them about the property, and the person wound up putting in an application.
Michelle's comment is that, really, if I say it a different way, it's much better to have someone else sell an applicant on doing business with you than you trying to sell the applicant on doing business with you. She had a situation that a realtor had suggested that her property was in a high crime rate area, and the existing occupant in the house was saying, no, that's not true, that's a different area, this is a wonderful place to live, and she received an application. It's absolutely true. And your tenants do want most of the same things that you want from the property. First of all, I just soon have the best house on the whole street. I just don't want to pay the best price on the street for the house on the street, but I'd love to have the tenant help me make it. The tenant wants to have the best house on the street. I really want happy tenants. They want to be happy. we have an awful lot in common. And if we work together, we accomplish so much more to meet those goals. You know, I don't know if we're being taped or not. And so if we are, I doubt that someone's going to answer this honestly and truthfully. But my question would be, if I thought you were going to answer it honestly, is there anyone in the room who is willing to admit that they discriminate in renting to tenants? Yeah. Any comments?
Yeah, I picked a guy that I thought would be the best for my situation. It was back in 2008, and there was a lot of foreclosures, and I had a lot of people with bad credit, but I picked who from a job standpoint, so I discriminated because I felt he would take the best care of the property.
Okay, so you discriminated positively.
Yeah.
Okay, here's my point. The word discrimination has become a bad word. Doesn't have to be a bad word. You must discriminate if you're a landlord. If you don't discriminate, you will not survive. Just don't discriminate illegally, meaning against any protected class. You must discriminate. They've got to have enough income to pay you. Certain things just have to be done. And everyone is absolutely paranoid as to, you know, where do they stand there? They got to take the first applicant that meets some minimum threshold and give them the keys to the castle. Otherwise, they're going to have a real problem. Let me give you a couple of examples why I don't believe that's true. Number 5 says, why do landlords accept applicants on a first-come, first-served basis? And I think there's 2 reasons. The very first one is they got a mortgage payment to make and they need the money. They need the cash. And I suspect in California, looking at your properties that have an extra 0 on them or so, most of them have a negative cash flow. A lot of them do. And so you really need the cash. But the second thing is, a lot of people are afraid of fair housing and having someone come after them with a fair housing complaint that they then have to spend their time and effort justifying why they did not discriminate illegally. A couple of comments. I was at a meeting in Kauai, Hawaii, with a whole bunch of landlords, and Jan Laser, who owns Monterey Bay Property Management, very, very successful investor in her own right, asked a question to Jelani Madarica, who is the lead civil rights analyst for U.S. Department of Housing, for HUD, in Honolulu's field office. He's an attorney for HUD. And she asked the one question that landlords never want to have asked to HUD. And the question was, we are working as agents for our owners, and I want to know, are we allowed to accept applicants on a best qualified basis? Well, you could have heard a pin drop in the room. I mean, absolute silence as to ask HUD that question. And there was a real pregnant pause. And once the pause was over, Jelani responded and said, yeah, I think you can. As long as you disclose up front that you're doing that, and you don't discriminate illegally against any of the protected classes. Now, for you Californians, you think, well, that might work there, but it won't work here. Does anyone know the name Janet Portman? Or to ask another way, does anyone know the name Nolo Press? Now, Nolo Press is located in Berkeley. That's kind of a pro-tenant type area, wouldn't you agree? Well, Janet writes a lot of stuff on landlord-tenant law, and she's written a bunch of books. She went to Stanford undergraduate and got her law degree at Santa Clara. She was a public defender, writes all kinds of places, and she essentially said the same thing. She said, when you're qualifying 2 tenants, yeah, there is a difference. They're not the same people. One may have had a job for 15 years and one just got a job 2 weeks ago. Different. You can discriminate based on that. Now in California, one of the ways you can't discriminate is source of income. I mean, that's a California deal, and you may have more stuff in San Diego. But, so first you got to know the laws, but here you've got someone from HUD that says you can pick on a best qualified basis, and you've got a California attorney in a very pro-tenant area essentially saying the same thing. I think that's important for you to know. Because I find landlords are scared to death, and yet I think you need to be like the Marines. You're looking for a few good tenants. You know, a lot of people, when they say all tenants are liars, tenants are no good, I'll ask a room, how many of you in this room were tenants at one point in time? How many of you were bum tenants? And I always get some hands. But most people don't view themselves that they were a terrible tenant. And if that's the case, you want someone like you. So share those expectations, screen for those people, and you'll find you have much more success in your rentals, and you'll sleep better, and it will be wonderful experience. I really do look forward to hearing from my tenants. They're all positive experiences. I really enjoy my tenants. They're really great. Okay, here's another question for you. Yeah, sure.
What do you think of discriminating when you compare it to you can take either person, but what you can't do is say, I didn't take the person on, because they belong to a certain group.
There are a bunch of protected classes that you need to know about. Familial status, families with children. You can't discriminate against children. You may not like children. You may say, I didn't have children in my life. I don't want them in my houses. You can't do that. It's against the law. You just can't use any of those criteria. Now the problem is you can't pick and choose to say why you pick someone over another person. You have to have consistent procedures so that you treat every applicant exactly the same. Their color of their skin doesn't matter. In California, their marital status doesn't matter. There's a number of things that are protected by law that you cannot discriminate against. So you do need a consistent screening criteria to deal with every applicant that looks at your property. And I'm going to show you mine, and I'm also going to make it available for you, if you like it, that you can borrow parts from it and use as much or as little as you like. Okay? Marrieds and singles. I'm just going to point out this one, then I'm going to take you to my application. California says you've got to treat marrieds and singles the same. How many of you have a joint application for married folks and individual applications for single folks? I mean, do you have a husband and wife? Do you make them fill out 2 applications or 1?
1.
How many do 1? See people nervously putting it up a little.
Doesn't the application have a...
Yeah, they have a place for husband and wife. They have a place for husband and wife. So there's no problem. You can do that, right? Okay, you can. But I'm suggesting that you might want to ask yourself why, and might there be a benefit of doing something else? Now let me show you my application. Give me 1 second to plug this in. What happened to the cord? They fall on the floor. Okay, hold on a second.
Yeah, David.
I got it. Got it. It will. Give it a second. I think. Should be on.
Yeah, head on.
I'll let you. Whoops, that's the problem. Came out, I guess. Oh, there it is. There you go. Okay. My application you're going to see is a bunch of pages, and you can't read it up here because it's too small. But I can walk you through it, and you've got a link that if you like it and you want to see it again, you can download it. And it's not in PDF, it's in Word, so you can beg, borrow, and steal whatever you like from it. Okay? The first thing I wanted to point out is my first statement says a separate application is required for each applicant over the age of 18, excluding dependent children. This guarantees our compliance with federal, state, and local fair housing laws. Now, why do you think I want a separate application if a single application would allow for husband and wife? Yeah, that's what I say. That's what I say, and that's right. But there's a little more to it. Yeah.
Obligation to pay rent.
Well, yeah, but I'm going to make them all obligated on the lease. I can screen them both individually, but I can do that even if they're on one application, if they both signed off. How many people in this room have been married to the same person for 40 years? I mean, my wife's here, and we've been married 40 years this year.
Yeah.
This month, in fact.
Congratulations. Yes.
But you can't, not too many people can say that. And you as a landlord, information is power, and you want more power. The more power, the better. You want information. And if you have everyone over the age of 18 fill out a separate application, you will get more information. And that's how you're going to make your decisions. So, what do? Anytime you give someone an unpleasant task, who do you blame it on?
Government.
Fair housing.
The bureaucrat. That's their purpose. Blame it on the bureaucrat. So to comply with fair housing, you're each going to have to go through this thing separately. Okay? Okay, so that's the first page. Then on item 4, it just says applicants are not accepted on a first-come, first-served basis. This first sheet just is a rental information and application packet instructions. Okay, so far? Next page. Next page is a rental transaction disclosure and applicant's acknowledgement and agreement to hold harmless agreement. The key things I'm going to point out is, first of all, the first bulleted item, which you can't read. It says, my company requires per its policy and procedure manual, and you need a policy and procedure manual, that a copy of this disclosure be signed by each applicant and returned to us before any action will be taken on your application. Okay? So you got to sign here, press hard before we go further. Next thing it says is, we disclose that all applicants will not be accepted on a first-come, first-served basis, and the Keeper Corporation shall screen prospective tenants on a best qualified basis and on the company's needs. And it goes on and says, the company's screening criteria as set forth in the company's policy procedure manual is available for inspection by appointment. The next paragraph says, applicants shouldn't tell us anything they don't want us to know, because if you do, we will use it against you. But the other side of that is, if you don't tell us everything about you, we're not going to give you the keys to the castle anyway. But we're just disclosing. At the bottom it says, I acknowledge, we essentially have them raise their right hand, I acknowledge that I've read this form and understand its meaning and agree to be bound by it in its entirety. I agree to look solely to Keeper Corporation as the acting landlord of the property and to hold all other parties harmless should any rental conflict or other problem involving the property offered for rent arise either now or in the future. Now, that's not bad. That means, Keeper Corporation doesn't own any real estate, trust me. It's a C corporation, but it leases properties from other entities and subleases. So does this mean it's my first potential wall between the owner of the property and the tenant? It is. It is. So it's not a bad idea. Will it hold up? Will it work? Beats the heck out of me. But first of all, if they think it will work, it will work. And, the last eviction I did was in 1981. It actually was the only eviction I ever did. It happened to be a urologist out of a house. And anyway, it was back in 81. I don't really need to go any further. You don't want to go to court. There's no reason to go to court. And so you ought to set yourself up to the best of your ability that you never go to court. You don't make money in court. If you win, you haven't made money in court. It takes your time, it takes your energy, it costs you, it's a drag. It will give you a headache. Okay, so the next page is the first of 3 pages of my application. I have a 3-page application. And the very first thing at the top says, separate applications are required for each applicant over the age of 18, excluding dependent children who will reside in the property. And it goes on and says, this guarantees our compliance with federal, the same thing. So I've said it multiple times. Disclose, disclose, disclose. It will never hurt you to over-disclose. Then I go on and say, the following two options are made available to all applicants. First option, applicants desiring to live together as a single housekeeping unit may elect to financially qualify for tenancy as a group, in which case landlord has the right to immediately terminate the rental agreement when any one member of that group vacates the property. Interesting, huh? Second option, each legal entity may elect to financially qualify for tenancy individually, in which case the occupant may continue to lease the property if one or more of the other parties to the rental contract vacates the property for any reason. Note, all applicants desiring to live together must choose the same option. What am I trying to say there? Yeah, if they split, what happens? They have to go if it's option one, right? Not exactly. Not exactly. Not exactly. Well, what really happens in the business? Oftentimes, for example, singles may get together to pool their resources to rent something that none of them can qualify to rent for individually, right? And so what I want to tell them right up front is, we're not in the rooming house business. We're not going to be in the revolving door business. You're not going to move a bunch of folks in here and change roommates on us back and forth. That's not our business. If that's what you want, don't rent from us, because we can jerk your chain, the whole thing's over. So we're sharing expectations right up front, okay? Now, if a tenant did move out, a single, and we certainly rented to singles, no problems, and don't discriminate illegally about that, because marrieds and singles in California are a protected class. If we rent to singles and one leaves, I'm a businessman. I'm going to look at the situation then and determine whether they have the financial ability and they're good stewards and they're going to be able to continue to stay in the property. And if they had someone who they wanted to move in, I'd require another application. I'd check them out and make a determination whether we can do business. But I'm letting them know up front that I'm a pro, that I know what I'm doing, don't play around, we're not in the rooming house business. Fair enough? Okay, the next statement says, no, applicants will not, in bold, be accepted on a first-come, first-served basis. So that's the third time I've said it as they're getting to the application. Hopefully I'm getting it across to them that we're looking for the best of the best folks. And I think you want the best of the best. And I really think the cheapest eviction you'll ever do is to not put the wrong guys in. And right along with that, I don't care what your mortgage payment is. I don't care if you're going to lose the house in 30 days. You have to have an attitude that I'd rather burn the house down than put the wrong guy in. You have to have that attitude. So the first paragraph is name, rank, and serial number, and how you want us to get a hold of you, because we find different generations react differently. I'm from the old school. My first choice is eyeball to eyeball, belly to belly. Next choice, telephone. If I have to, email. Lastly, text messaging. Our kids are all text messages, so you got to find out how you got to reach people. Then we go down and we say, list your last 4 years residence history and at least your last 2 addresses. If you've been 30 years in one place, I want to know where you were before that. And I want 4 years rental history. Most people go 2 landlords. Go more than that. Information's power. Make them give you that information. You want it. You'll get a lot more. You don't know if the existing landlord's trying to get rid of these folks. So go back further, 4 years. And you really you find out so much more because you don't want to see a lot of turnover during that time. There's a few things, other things in there that I'll point out. Like type of property they're moving from. Apartment, duplex, fourplex, townhome, condo, mobile home, house. I'm in the house business. That's my expertise. I've had multis, I've had various things. I can discriminate if I have 2 applications side by side and one person's moving from an apartment and one person's moving from a house and all other things are equal, I'm going to take the house guy. Why? Different mindset. The guy in the apartment When he has something goes wrong, he wants to pick up the phone, call a number, have a guy wearing a uniform come down the hall carrying a toolbox 20 minutes later to solve the problem. The guy in the house is very different. He's in his house because he wants to be able to walk out his front door, walk all the way around the house and say, get off my property. He's much more a homeowner in training, so to speak. He wants to be able to put in his vegetable garden. He has tools. He has yard equipment. There's a reason I'd rather have a guy coming from a house to a house than an apartment to a house. Apartment folks don't stay as long in an apartment. I saw a question back there or a comment.
Yeah, it's when the experience I've had is when I'm having people fill out stuff and there's, you know, these history lines and, you know, more information, and typically they may only partially fill it out. So are you doing this on a computer as part of your system, so they have no choice, they can't go any further unless they complete the whole thing?
The question is, how about people get the application, they say there's too much work, so they fill it out real sketchily and don't put in all the information. In our information it says, we will only process completed applications. What we're trying to do in this whole business, if you can visualize, is we've got this great big funnel out there, and we want to dump a ton of people into the funnel. And we want the funnel to get rid of all the chaff, and only a few good ones come out the bottom. So the fact that people will look at my application, and some of you are going to say, they'll look at my application and say, they'll never fill it out, and you're going to lose them. But my response is, I just dodged the bullet. They're the wrong guys. I didn't want to do business with those guys. And as long as I'm not showing it, and I've got no time and effort in it at all, I don't do anything until I get an application, then, you know, I don't care. And see, in our program, you want people to jump through a whole bunch of hoops, but you don't want to show them how many hoops they're going to jump through at the beginning. There's a whole bunch of little hoops. The first one is they find the ad on the internet, or they see a sign in the yard. Then they call a phone number. Then they set up an appointment. We have a whole packet that goes out to our existing tenants to show them how to deal with people that want to see the house. Then they go see the house. Then they fill out the application. Then it comes to us. They've got a lot of time in it. I got no time in it at all. Zip. So I can surgically cut it off at any point in time. But they really, the psychological perception is they're really applying for this house, and they're trying to convince me why I should give them the keys to the castle. I never try and convince them why they should rent our stuff. Yeah?
I have a question. You talk about go back 3 years, your history, not that previous.
Right.
I'm told here in California, what you really say, someone calls you for, find out about a previous tenant. The only you say is that
He's saying that in California, the only thing you can say about a prior tenant is that they live there. Well, I'm going to read you my, what they've allowed me to do at the end, and you'll have to decide, and you've got to know California law. That's certainly not true for me. I don't believe that's true if you get a real sign-off, but I'll read you what I've got, and you can make that determination and check it out, okay? And I also think private landlords, they don't know the law. So whether they can or can't doesn't mean they won't tell you information, okay? Vehicles. The only reason vehicles are really on there is, let's say you have a property on a cul-de-sac with a homeowners association. Cars can't be on the street overnight. There's not enough parking facilities. You've got a bunch of singles that want to rent together. No problem. You'll rent to the singles, but they can only have enough vehicles that will fit in the driveway. And so it may disqualify them because they've got more than that. Remember that, because you don't want to be dealing with the HOA. HOAs can be a drag for landlords in many, many parts of the country. Okay, next page. List your employment history for the last 4 years. Oh, one other thing I didn't point out that's very important on the landlord questions. I have, how long have you lived at these places for the last 4 years? But then I've also got, what are the occupancy dates? Because you don't want an applicant to conveniently forget one of the landlords that he did business with in the last 4 years where it didn't work out exactly the way he wanted you to see. It didn't work out right. Okay, you follow that? So not only have length of occupancy, but exactly when they were there. Now I've got the same kind of thing with the employment. The key thing with the employment is when you ask them their income, ask them what is your monthly gross and your net. Because they're very, very different figures. And if you say, what's your income, you don't have a clue what they're giving you. So get both so that they can't tell you one and not lie, but lie by omission, so to speak, because of all the things that come out of it. Jumping on to the last page of my application, I asked some things that you don't see on many applications. For example, right at the top it says personal skills, plumbing, carpentry, painting, electrical, mechanical, other. Then it says tools you own, toolbox, mower, yard tools, snow shovel, hoses, sprinklers. I think that to live in a house demands owning a toolbox. And what we're trying to say right up front is if you don't own a toolbox, you're going to pay the nice man who does. So we want to find out, and they're applying for a job to maintain this house, so you better make sure that they've got the right skill set. Really important. We've got a series of questions which I know you can't read, and you really don't want me to read through them all, but I'll read a couple of them just to make the point. We've got a series of questions that start with things like, have you ever been evicted or asked to move from any tenancy? Have you ever broken a rental agreement or lease? Have you ever willfully, intentionally refused to pay rent when due? Do you know of anything that might interrupt your income stream? We've got a whole series of them. And buried in the middle, it is item 11 of item 14. It says, rent is due in advance on the last business day of the month. Are you able to fulfill this requirement? Now, what have I done there?
You've discriminated.
No, that's not it. Yeah.
So it's something that you want a yes on in the midst of all the no's.
Exactly right. And I did that absolutely intentionally because I want to make sure they're reading. I want to make sure they're trainable, that they'll pay attention. And so you bury it. Every answer should be no, except for one should be a yes. And that's really important. You want to be able to see if they're paying attention. Then we have the next paragraph is a blank paragraph. It says, list any additional information you think which will help us process your application. You'd be amazed. We have people write us letters. They give us copies of their bank statements. They'll tell us all kinds of things we can't ask. They'll say, Mom lives on the street. She watches our kids. We'll kill to get on the street. They just told me that they're maybe the right guys for the house. You want that information. Give them an opportunity to sell themselves and tell you something that you haven't specifically asked. You'll get good information. Okay? The next paragraph strictly says you've got to pay us a fee to process the application. The amount of the fee is immaterial, but I want them to pay something because I want them to think they've got a shot at getting this house. If they don't, why waste my time? Don't turn in an application. I want bona fide people to come through that funnel at the bottom. The following paragraph says, applicant further agrees if for any reason he or she ever becomes delinquent in rents or other charges, landlords hereby authorized to charge applicant's MasterCard or Visa account, and authorization is hereby given. They've listed the MasterCard and Visa on the previous page, so does it mean I could charge their rent and charges to their Visa and MasterCard? The answer is yes, I could. And I do have a merchant account, so I could. And if you don't have a merchant account, go to squareup.com and get one. You can plug it into your phone and you can get one. You know, you can charge real easily. Have I ever done it? No, not one time. Would I? Probably never. What I'm trying to say there is we're not in the business of collecting rents. We're in the business of providing good housing to good folks. So what I find is if people don't like that, they go back and white out their Visa and MasterCard numbers, that's a red flag. I'm looking for red flags. I never said I'll ever charge anything unless they're late. I don't want people to ever be late. Now, I have a friend in Fort Myers, Florida. He says, I don't like your system at all. I said, why? I said, it's very efficient. I get all my rents in 5 minutes a month because I take it out of their bank accounts. I use ACH, Automatic Clearinghouse. He said, I think it's terrible. I get $48,000 a year in late fees. I'd lose all that. I said, okay, if you want the late fees, I don't like the negative energy of chasing after someone, and I find if I had that much more time, I could go make a lot more than $48,000, or I could go sit on the beach and read a book if I wanted, but I've got options that you don't have. So you got to look at that. I mean, some people take the approach that I'm like MasterCard. You pay me on time and there's no fee. You miss by a day, there's a fee. Either way works. Figure out what works for you. I want efficiency. I like systems for that kind of thing. Authorization. I'd love to read you the authorization, but I see I'm really running out of time. You can get it online. Read the authorization. See, it says that they'll pay the attorney's fees for anyone who tells me something about them. They'll hold them harmless, and it also gives me authorization to turn them in to the credit bureaus and all kinds of other things. So read it if you go online and download the application. I have an applicant evaluation form, and we really don't have time to go through it. It's a normal shakedown on FICO scores, credit. We want to make sure that they haven't spent their last nickel. That if they have a flat tire, they can fix it and still make sure they can pay us the rent. Key things I want to show you on the bottom of the second page of my shakedown form is you go through the whole things, and the first thing is it says discrepancies or inconsistencies found in qualifying the application. You're trying to find discrepancies and inconsistencies. Are they moving from a house or an apartment? Are they present to sign the contract? Do they own tools? Changes after completing the application? Do they desire to buy? If so, when? If I want to sell the house, I want them to want to buy because they're going to end up being the proud owners. They just don't know it yet. If I don't want them to buy the house, then I don't want them to ever want to buy. States I really want the house. There's a whole series of things, and then it's additional information volunteered, additional financial information that impacts our decision, derogatory comments about current or prior landlords, employers, our systems and procedures, comments like my attorney, that's not legal. Don't ever do business with a tenant who intimidates you. Why would you? There's no business. It's your stuff, play by your rules. Comment in the back?
Yeah. David, how do you tell them no? I mean, how do you tell them thanks but no thanks? I mean, simply, you know, when you decided, you're talking to them, you decide them.
Yeah, the Fair Credit Reporting Act says that if you make a negative decision and any part of that decision is based upon credit, you must send them a letter disclosing that, telling them a whole series of things, what their credit score was, what day you pulled it, and you can also turn them down based on other items. We just send the letter out. If they call, we tell them we've rented to someone else, or you did not meet our profile. But we will not let someone that we feel is the wrong person to move into our house. Now, timing. Am I done? Do we have questions? Where do we stand? You tell me.
Actually, take some questions, I believe.
Well, first of all, on the bottom of your handout, there is a link. And that link actually does two things for you. The form's there. I think that my son-in-law is my IT guy, and I can't quite remember how he did it. I think you put in your email, he sends you a link, and you download the forms. And they are in Word situation. The other thing on that link that you may or may not be interested in, I do a 2-day hassle-free property management class once a year. And it just so happens it's at the end of this month. I flip-flop different sides of the country, and I happen to be doing it in Orange County. Reggie brought me here. Reggie and I are friends. I came out for a seminar that I and my wife took. That's why we're here. We've got a special deal for the club. It's $145 off for the 1 day. We also have a 3rd day of master leasing. If you're interested, it's on that link. If you're not, ignore it.
We have some of the forms in the back of the room. And do you want to describe real quick about master leases and what that?
Sure. And let me just tell you, don't use this link, because this link will cost you 45 bucks more. Okay? So use the link that's on the other handout at the bottom. Use that link if you're interested, because Reggie's a friend, and anyway, that's the way it is.
Why do they want to learn about master leases?
Well, it's what we're telling our kids to do. My wife and I master leased over 100 houses. And master leasing is really when I rent a house from Michelle, and I lease it to Marissa, and I take a spread out of the middle. And I think it's the most cost-effective way to get in this business, especially in a market where housing costs so darn much. And it doesn't make economic sense to rent it oftentimes. With a master lease, you can lease properties. I don't care if it's Santa Barbara, San Diego. I actually spend 8 months of my life in Florida, and I spend 4 months in Colorado Springs. Our properties are in Colorado Springs. You can rent properties anywhere. How do you rent them? You rent them either on a performance basis, where you say, I'll pay you a percentage of the rent I receive if and when I receive it. And if I don't receive it, I won't pay anything. And you pay the expenses a la carte. Or you can guarantee the rent. You can say, I'll guarantee you the rent. I'll give you 12-month post-dated checks. You can go around the world. You can put them in the bank periodically. I'll take care of all the expenses up to a stop loss. And you say, well, why would I do that? Well, first of all, we're going to say, what's market rent? Then what are we going to take off of market rent when we negotiate? I'm going to say, how much would management fees cost you? And what do you think most owners say when you say how much are management fees? Take a guess. They say 10%. So then you say, okay, how much is maintenance? We got to take that off too if I'm paying for it. How much is maintenance? 10%. So how much is vacancy? 10%. Then there's one more thing we ought to take off. What is that? It's profit. Why? Because I'm willing to take a risk that no manager is ever willing to take. I'm going to guarantee the rent. And obviously it depends on how long you lease the property for, makes a big difference. I leased a house for 35 years at a fixed rent. And I secured my lease with a deed of trust. And 10 years later, the owner gave me half the appreciation to remove my lease from the property. Leases are valuable. I have a son-in-law. Am I okay for a moment? I have a son-in-law who is a newspaper reporter, a sports writer. And he couldn't support my daughter and 3 kids very well. And he saw our lifestyle, and he owned a rental because he was moved out of town, and he came back to Colorado Springs, and he wanted to get into our business. He's leased over 90 houses. I don't know the exact number. He owns 7 or 8, has options on some. If you lease someone else's house, it's your first bite. Think of yourself as a bulldog terrier. You get a bite out of the property. You get to test drive it, see if it's any good. You'll find if you underpromise and overperform, the owners are going to want to deal with you with that property down the road. You have a good chance of acquiring a whole bunch of property with owner financing. The best way to sell master leasing, in my opinion, is not that we'll make you more money, but we'll lose you less than you're losing today with a vacant house. It is like shooting fish in a barrel. No one does it. You have so many more tools at your disposal than a fee manager. They have a one-size-fits-all. Our fee is X. On a master lease, you see what the owner needs, give them what they need, and you take everything else.
One last question.
Do you find there is an issue of attrition of quality applicants because the people that are willing to go to this level of scrutiny are exactly people you don't want, and any self-pick person with that saying, oh, I got this.
Question was, do I find that I have poorer applicants because good folks won't jump through the hoops I want them to jump through, so the only people that jump through are really the bottom fit? No, not at all. I find I get wonderful people. I get people with 800 FICO regularly. I get really good people in my houses, and we offer a good product, and you know it works really well. I'll be at the bar.
One more.
The policies and procedures that you talked about that you should have in place.
Yeah.
Is that something in the class that you?
Okay, really quickly, outline of the class. The first thing we do is I do a mock lease-up with someone who hasn't seen my forms. And there's a couple people in this room who've been through the class before. Normally it knocks you off the chair, because what we do is quite unusual and quite different. And that takes an hour and a half or so. Because I think every time you have a meeting with an applicant or a tenant, a training is taking place, the question is who's training who?
Right.
So we set that up to be, number one, the final sieve in the screening process, and a training process to let them know what we do expect of them and what they can expect of us. Secondly, after we're done with that, I go through the legal, the business, and the psychological aspects of the business. Then I give you my policy procedure manual. Then I give you a whole group of forms. Then I go through problems I've had since 1978 to now and how I solve them, letters and issues. Then I got some other stuff. Then the master leasing course is a different course. Okay?
Bottom line, take the course. It's going to really, really do you guys a good favor. David will be available after the meeting. There's always networking after the bar. And I think we're just going to finish up here real quick and we'll be all done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Almost done here. So to wrap things up here, you can always find us at SanDiegoInvestmentClub.com. Right over here is the subscribe button for a blog. And we've got information coming up soon, so we just started the blog, and check it out, please. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all that good stuff. And then to reiterate our Fast Start program, we're actually not going to have one in October, but come November, we're going to have a Fast Start program there as well. And you can always find us on Meetup. A lot of you found us here. If you have a hard time finding on Meetup, just go to FIBI.com. That'll bring you right to the Meetup website. Hopefully you guys did register through Meetup. If you do, please just rate us. So far we have 100% 5-star rating, which I think is pretty fantastic. Here's some websites you can go to, SDICFIBI.com, is what I mentioned earlier. You can San Diego Investment Club. There's your Facebook and YouTube, and then you can also find Imran and I at McKinnonClark.com. And I think that's about it. So there's networking in the bar. Everybody just get up and go to the bar, go talk to each other, go make some deals, and have a bunch of fun. So thank you guys for coming out. We really appreciate it. See you next time.